in the project management world, we have realized over the last 3 years that agility and the ability to work with the flow is what it's all about. Unfortunately, our other speaker from the United States, Mohammed Babo, is not going to be able to join us through unforeseen circumstances. So we are going to move straight onto the panel now. And the great thing is that this gives us a little bit more time for conversation. So I'm going to invite Marcus back to the stage along with somebody who really needs no introduction, I think, to most people in the project management world, and that is Dr. Lynn Keys. And as you know, Lynn is the immediate past president of PMI South Africa. And if you've been at any of the last 4 summits, you will know what an extensive contribution she has brought to PMI. She is a citizen of the world, having lived and worked in 50 countries. She's a global thinker and what she calls a pracademic. And Lynn, I'm going to come back to you and ask you what you mean by that a little bit later. With over 30 years of combined experience, and she really focuses on project management, international development, and sustainability. She believes that sustainability must now and also consider the interactions and impact of artificial intelligence systems. She's an adjunct professor of project management for the competitive advantage at Schema Business School in Paris, and probably one of the most interesting people I have ever had the honor of being able to speak to. So Lynn, thanks very much. If you don't make the same mistake that I do, if you can put your microphone on, that would be great. But I also seem we are one panelist short. I'm going to say to the audience, so this is an ideal opportunity for you to be part of the panel. So I'm going to keep the participant panel up, and occasionally, if you do have something that you'd like to add, I will ask people to put their hand up, and anybody who'd like to make a comment. But please do make use of the chat. Please make use of the Mentimeter questions as well. Team, if you can also just help me with the chat, if I miss a question, if you can maybe just put your hand up and ask a question as well. So Marcus, welcome back. And today we are going to focus in the panel predominantly on the one subject that has come through in just about every single presentation, and that is ethics. To share a personal story, I was doing my PhD research and I was reading some big trend reports on what was coming in AI. And after spending a weekend going through all of these reports, I knew that life as we know it was changing. It was changing dramatically. And if we do not, as humans, consciously involve ourselves in an ethical conversation, then we possibly are setting ourselves up for all sorts of unintended consequences. So please, as we start thinking about it, let's dig deep. What are your ethical concerns in project management? What should we be focusing on as we move forward? So Lynn, I think that I'm going to start with you. If you were to give us a recipe for what AI is in project management, what would that be?
A recipe for what AI is in project management. Yeah. That's interesting. Well, one is that it does facilitate the analysis of data, which is now, as our speakers spoke about, we live in a very complex environment and projects reflect that. Very complex projects, mega projects, even people don't even think of complexity in mega projects, but actually there's tremendous complexity in social and economic projects that impact the development of nations and communities. So a recipe for AI in projects would be importantly, is the use of the data, but you need to complement that with human skills. To me, that's the recipe. Those are the ingredients. And those human skills are relationship skills, critical thinking, creativity is very important, empathy, imagination, sense making, which means when you get a group of different people together, you don't all necessarily share the same meaning. So you need to talk about it and gain a sense of who understands what and come to some sort of understanding as to what this thing means. And you need adaptability. Even spirituality is a human trait. And there's a guy, Halpern, he's no longer with us, unfortunately, who actually wrote a book. He's British, wrote a book on project management and spirituality, and even strategizing. And then something else I would say, because it came up, I think, in your presentation, Marcus, is the ability to fail as humans, because failing is a skill.
Yeah.
Failing correctly and being able to get up and move forward and learn from it is a skill. So that would be a recipe.
Wonderful, and thank you so much. Let's bounce over that over to you, Marcus. Failure is a skill. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, similar to what Lynn already said, right? And I think I had it already in my presentation to some degree, right? Failure is, and I always focus on knowledge, right? It's my key focus point, especially when we talk about data coming in, right? Failure is also knowledge, right? Because we actually get insights out of it. And I said before, right? If we're not, I mean, we're failing, we're just humans, right? We're always failing in there, right? It's just a question of how public we make it, right? And how good we are actually at talking about it. And that links also to this whole aspects of being transparent, etc. I mean, think about it like my 11-year-old son, right? He comes home with a school exam, and it's excellent, it's perfect. He tells me all the details, probably for days, right? About this. He comes home with a bad school exam and he failed, right? It's a completely different story. Ideally, he wouldn't even want to show that and rather would want to hide it, right? So that's, I mean, failure is just natural. So it's not a question about failing or not failing. It's more a question of actually, yeah, being open about this, right? And that has an impact on culture, which actually needs to support this and enable this kind of thing, because failure is ultimately knowledge. And if we talk about AI and we want to get all kinds of insights, right, then you have no other way of just, you have to open up on this, right? Because otherwise you will just fool your algorithms with all kinds of success stories and half-baked truths about whatever failed, right? So to answer your question, yeah, I mean, it's a necessary thing. And I think we need to even hurry up on this, right? Because projects, as we know, are not really performing too well. And we need this kind of practices like, not maybe even AI to start with, but at least some data-driven approach to help us to get better. And that definitely requires already this approach of what we call as embracing failure.
And isn't embracing failure a very, very human thing? You know, Lynn, I'm thinking back to the PMI summit 4 years ago, where we had a conversation around AI as well. And I remember the one thing that you always said is that the future of work is human. All right.
Yes.
So how do we now look at and failure is a very human thing too. How do we actually practically build this into the way that we go forward?
Failure. In terms of AI?
I think in terms of AI and project management practice,
management practices.
You know, just at a very practical level, because projects have to succeed. So how do we actually build maybe the ability to fail, understanding that this is a very human thing?
Yeah. If I can also relate it to something that was in the chat, what is it to fail correctly? Well, as you know, for most inventors, if you think about Thomas Edison, he had 2,000 or so failed experiments. And from that, he learned what was the way not to do something. Okay, now we don't want to have to fail 2,000 times, but this, even with agile practices, the whole idea is to fail quickly to learn. And we all go through a process of learning, unlearning, and relearning. And that's the focus that we have to take in our conscious way of working. If we don't do that, we'll never learn from the failures that we have. Now, in terms of project management, and Bev, could you say the question again? Because I lost one aspect of it.
All right.
When we talk about failure.
You know, failure being the future of work.
Future of work.
Human. Okay.
Yeah,
and
being
failure,
human.
Yeah, and failure is part of that. So I think failure, but can you talk more about the future of work?
Future of work is human. Well, actually, I'm taking that quote from Gert Leonhard, who's a German futurist. And he says that AI is about efficiency. Okay, it's about machines, but work is human. Okay. And the thing is about AI and work and the future of work, AI really, if we look at it, what is it about? What do we want it to be about? I think as a society, as human beings, we want it to be about the improved well-being of individuals, of society, of the world, and our planet, and other living creatures. And I link it very closely to sustainability, okay? And the core of sustainability is really about human well-being and the well-being and preservation of the planet. And if we can look at AI in those terms and shape what we want the future to look like in terms of human well-being, the sustainability of human well-being and the planet, then we will have an AI that can integrate well with humans, or I should say that won't be technology driven, because I've heard a couple of speakers talk about technology will develop, okay? But we can shape the development of technology and determine where we want it to go. If we do not shape it, it will go to places that we don't want it to go. And it will not create the kind of societies and communities and individuals that we want to see in the future.
I absolutely agree. And Johan, thank you so much for jumping in and joining us on the panel. It's really, really lovely to have you. I'd just like to pop onto the chat because, guys, this is fabulous. You're keeping the conversation going. Philip says, perhaps with the integration of AI and project management, there would be a shift towards predictive and proactive project management, as AI could be used to identify potential risks and issues before they arise. Johan, if we look at, the whole idea of risk, because risk is a big question when we talk about AI, how can we do this in a very practical and proactive way? Any thoughts around that?
Look, the advantage of joining late is that I might totally contradict what was said up until now, or totally embarrass myself. Yeah, look, it's almost like comparing a normal bomb to a nuclear bomb. The kind of damage or the effect that this kind of technology can have compared to projects without this technology is totally different. So again, back to what I said earlier, the risk on our workforce, on our people, the way we work, the value of people in an organization, obviously then the whole jobs displacement thing. When it comes to compliance, there's most likely, and the use of data, the biases in data and things like that, huge risks there. I had a chat with somebody just a few days ago about, the local legislation here in South Africa, the protection of private information, which is quite aligned with GDPR in Europe. And we've just recently seen TransUnion and a number of organizations being hacked, losing millions of customers' data. But we don't see the penalties ascribed in the legislation, 10 years imprisonment, 10 million rand fine for directors. None of that has happened. So I think until the hammer really comes down, we will try and get away with whatever we can. And that's not a good place to be, I think, with this technology. Bev, I hope that answered your question. When we come to how it's going to impact us from a physiological point of view, from a philosophical point of view, there's some other risks there as well, but I want to try and stay on topic.
That's absolutely fantastic. And then I'll come to you now, because maybe
I want to add to something what he said, the question.
I'll grab you now. Just have a thought. Are we becoming very over-regulated though, Johan? Because what we tend to do is we tend to say, in order to make humans behave, all right, we give them a set of rules. And if they don't behave, we give them more rules. And if we don't behave, we give them more rules. Do we not need to move that? Won't you just follow up on that? And then Lynn, I'll come over to you.
Okay. We always have a fine balance between innovation and regulation. And I think, yes, regulation, there are negative aspects to it, but I would lean toward the fact, Bev, that we need more regulation when it comes to this technology, especially in South Africa, where we have very little regulation when it comes to a responsible use of data, responsible use of AI, and so forth. Again, because, I mean, if you ask this question to a nuclear physicist building a nuclear bomb, compared to somebody, and it's maybe a stupid example, but take the potential power for good and bad, that's exponential with this technology into the future. And people might disagree, I don't think we can regulate it enough. That's just my view.
Wonderful. Lynn, over to you.
Yeah, this whole question of predictive and proactive project management, I prefer proactive over predictive, because project management historically has been based on prediction, and that's predicated on control. And we have found that it doesn't work very well because of the complexity in which we live. And if you even look at PMBOK version 7, the 7th edition, what it focuses on are the uniquely human skills that enable project managers and project teams to be able to adapt and shape the approach to the project based on content. Now, that doesn't dismiss AI, okay? Because AI is providing you that data, an analysis that you need to make decisions. Now, do we want machines to make intelligent machines? And I'm not talking about robots, because we're talking about processed data, right? Digitized data to make our decisions for us. They can make this proposed decisions, but then there's still the human element that needs to bring in things that could be changing in the environment that has not been captured in the data. We don't know who has controlled the data. We don't know the context of the data. Okay, as someone said before in the earlier presentations about the whole use of control and whether or not data is accurate and what population the data is reflecting. And I think someone also talked about the intuition. If you think about it, you look at the pros and cons of a situation, but there may be something that you're sensing from the data that may tell you that the decision may be a little bit different than what that process digitized analytics might be telling you. So we need to combine both. We need the data, but we also need to understand where the data is coming from and what constitutes that data that then leads to and then how it's analyzed, and then the decisions that are made based on the data.
Absolutely. Johan, any comments before I hand over to Marcus? Because I think I've got a question to ask Marcus around this.
I agree with what Lynn is saying. What you cannot automate experience. And we know that subjectivity and gut feel does not always serve us well, but it serves us better than not using it. And sometimes just because you've done this thing for 15 or 20 or 30 years, you just know things instinctively, which you can't automate. I don't know if AI will ever get there. And so I fully agree with Lynn. I think we can expand the usage of this technology to serve us, but you can't, the whole thing again of taking the robot out of the person. And just to end off, I wrote a piece in Business Day 2 weeks ago called The Age of AI, Thinkers Needed. And it's based on a book called Is Google Making Us Stupid? Because we are learning to not think anymore because technology is automating stuff. But and in the article, I argued that the humanities, ethics, religion, language, classical Greek or Latin even, we should use that or teach that before we even teach robotics. So yes, human intuition, human experience cannot be automated. We should not undermine it because of all this other smart technologies, in my view.
Thank you, Han. Marcus, in your presentation, you talked about data being the new oil. And I'm just having a look at some of the comments as well. I mean, Zerli says AI needs to have the ability to understand compromise and the untruth of absolute answers. Truth is only truth based on the current knowledge and facts. Everything is improving. How should we be looking at data? Should we be, we talk about data-driven decision making. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, to start with, I don't even like that term, data-driven decision-making. I rather would call it data-informed decision-making, because data-driven kind of implies that we take data and we just listen to data, whatever what it's giving us, and based on that, we're taking decision. And as Johan said, there's and then risk we just stop thinking and just take something forward from either data or AI, but not based on our own experience, which cannot be ignored, right? There are limitations to data and AI, what it can give us in terms of insight. That needs to be complemented with our own experience and knowledge, right? And in that context, when people, there's a risk that people are becoming too data driven in the end, and you can identify them. Actually, when you go into a meeting and people come up with, the data says this, right? And that's why we have to take that decision. The data says, the data is saying nothing, right? Nothing. We are actually interpreting things, right? We make basically out of data what we want it to be. And that's why we need some upskilling and have to be really careful and also mix it with human experience to become informed. So it's the example that I had in my presentation with the navigation system. I mean, obviously, we have probably already some self-driving cars, but I mean, today, at least me, right, in my car, if my navigation system says you have to take the next to the right, well, I will not just close my eyes and go to the right, right? I start thinking, is that actually true? Or am I running against the wall? So these kind of things, right? And we should not stop thinking because there are a lot of things that are not captured by data, as we said already before, in terms of leadership skills and more people-focused elements, right? Emotional intelligence and these kind of things.
Thanks, Marcus. Lynn, your thoughts?
Yeah, in fact, if I can quote someone who was in that discussion we had in 2019 on AI meets PM, Ryan Falkenberg, who's the CEO of Clever, he was on that discussion group with us. And he said the key differentiator between AI and humans is emotional intelligence, okay? And that's a unique human skill that we need to apply to any data, I like, Marcus, your term, informed decisions.
Thanks, Lynn. I'd like to move on to something. I mean, algorithms are probably the vehicle that is driving the AI world at the moment. And there's some very, very interesting discussions happening around this at the moment. Mohammed, had he been on the call, had some very interesting stories to share about what's really going well in the medical world using algorithms. And as much as they can identify disease, in fact, Johan, in yours, the brain transplant, the chip in the brain, also a brilliant example, is absolutely fundamentally incredible in terms of innovation, but therein also lies the danger. And I'd like to chat about something which is very much part of our social discourse at the moment, and that is, are we programming bias into our algorithms? And an example of the fact that, databases are maybe made up of largely white data. How is that affecting the way that we treat people from other ethnic groups? Are we discriminating against women? I saw a story the other day where insurance algorithms are discriminating against women in their algorithms. Are we automatically assuming that certain groups of people like something, so we're planning our algorithms around that? And as we know, algorithms are designed to give us more of what we are talking about. So I think, Lynn, I'm going to start with you again, just in terms of bias, because I think this is a really powerful conversation that we need to be having. What do we as humans need to become conscious about as we are programming any kind of technology? And it's not even writing an algorithm, it's even how we are curating our feeds on Facebook and that kind of thing in terms of bias. What should we be aware of?
Yeah, well, first thing I would say is we need to be consciously aware of the impact that AI has on our human lives. That's the first thing. Because if we're not understanding that, we can't go to the next level to determine what are the things we need to consider when we're developing these algorithms, okay? In fact, if you think about algorithms now, because they're digitized, well, when you think of heuristics before, there were certain kinds of heuristics people used in making decisions. Those heuristics also had certain biases impacted in them, okay? So I think we need to develop, I mean, this comes down to ethics, okay? In terms of the, how you would, what you would include and consider. Ethics, and this is how you develop standards, protocols, policies, frameworks, but they all have to be rooted in ethics. And ethics is a difficult thing because we know different people have a different sense of what ethics are. And if I heard someone say before, I don't know if it's in our previous conversation, that when you bring the ethics into the room, all of a sudden people feel that progress slows down. But it doesn't slow down. What it does is it makes us consider the impact on different individuals, communities, societies, nations, all around the world. And AI has a pervasive impact right now on the world. And without having these ethical standards, protocols, practices, policies, and frameworks, we're going to see a greater exacerbation of what already exists. Economic inequality, social inequality, intellectual inequality, given access to education and intellectual means like even AI, because AI doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to function in the same way worldwide. Some societies will have better access, other societies will have less access. Some societies will apply artificial intelligence or the algorithms in the way that are positive and have a positive impact on human lives, jobs, or even. And in other parts, they may be applying them in ways that have very negative impacts on people. So it goes to me, back, for me, it goes back, what is our vision for this? It needs to have some boundaries. And we need to determine what they are.
Absolutely.
And who needs, and we need to decide who needs to determine what they are.
Therein lies the question, Lynn. Who needs to be doing this? And Johanna, I'm going to come back to the conversation on regulation, because one of the questions that came up very early in the thread today was, can we talk more about legal frameworks? Now, when we talk about an ethical framework, a regulated framework, we can be looking at a South African framework, we could be looking at an African framework, we can be looking at a global framework. And I think maybe that the whole vaccine rollout is a very good example of this, is that when in times of crisis, people tend to look after themselves, number one, all right? And the question is, who is making the global decisions? Is there a need for an international, national, local, organizational framework that is agreed in order, and I'm talking specifically an ethics framework here?
Look, I'm going to sound very pessimistic about human beings, and I'm not, but we are fundamentally tribal and selfish. And one of my favorite authors, and I said favorite, now I can't remember who it is, but in one of his books, he starts the book by saying, in every civilized man, there is a pagan waiting to come out. And we see this when there are natural disasters, the kind of pillaging and all the horrible things that happen. And you know, if there's a tragedy where I live and tomorrow it's between me and my son eating or my neighbor and his children eating, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to make sure they don't eat. You know, so it's kind of easy for us in a way to theorize about this, you know, because we're fairly high up the so-called Maslow triangle in a way. But I mean, when the nonsense hits the fan, when it's about basic human survival, we become different beings, you know. So I think that the challenge with regulation is, who are the regulators and what are they trying to achieve or trying to get out of it? And it's a follow the money conversation as well. That is the challenge, you know. If I could just quickly touch on the bias thing. I heard a wonderful story that illustrates this. A bunch of missionaries went to some tribe in Africa and worked with them. And they realized that all the ladies, all the females in the village would walk down to the river every day, to a few miles, to get water to bring back for drinking and washing and cooking and the like. And they said, we can automate this. So they built a pipeline down to the river that would pump the water back up to the community. And within a year or two, the social structure of that community fell apart. And because it shows you those biases again, even if it's meant well, because we all have biases. And what kept that community apart was all these women every day spending all that time walking down to the river, chatting, counseling each other, things like that, all the way back again. So, we can so easily, because we perceive the world through our own lens. One last example, just before I stop on this. I was in a webinar where we spoke about the digital divide here in South Africa, and and one of the speakers, we were all a bunch of white guys on the panel in any case, which is a problem already, because you need a multi-gender, multi-ethnicity, multi-background team to make sure the biases are out of the way. This person said, there's no more excuse for young people in South Africa not to educate themselves, because we all have smartphones, we all have internet, 5G is being rolled out. And I said to him, but have you yourself actually ever been to a township or to a rural area? Have you lived in a shack, which I've done for many years as part of my community work? He said 6 people are using the same phone. It's definitely not a smartphone. You would be very surprised if there's actually a proper internet connectivity. So it's easy to jump on our little castle of philosophy, our little throne, to say there's no excuse not to educate yourself, as an example, because we think the way I live and the way my neighbors live is how everyone lives. It's a fundamental human problem, but back to Lynn's point, starting with acknowledging it's a problem and then working on, it's not acknowledging that we have a problem where the real problems really start.
Absolutely. Those are such lovely stories, Johan. Thank you so much. Mark is going to hand over to you. Generally, your feelings of what you've heard so far, but also then if you can maybe deep dive cultures about the conversations that we have. And that story that Johan told about the woman going down to the river is that our cultures are built through one conversation at a time. It's built through the dialogue that we have. What is the impact on culture as well? So I'd be keen to hear your thoughts, not only generally on the discussion, but on that specifically.
You mean what? Sorry, maybe I misunderstood the question. The impact on culture from what exactly? From
right. So the impact of bias on culture, but also on the fact that AI does change our social structures. That story of going down to the river. So AI and maybe a good example in the workplace would be we have to go from face-to-face meetings to virtual meetings, which change the social construct.
Yeah, I mean, I had actually a conversation also around biases and cultural impacts with also an author of several books about AI and project management. Paul Boudreau is his name. And that was interesting because he has a point of AI, basically you can automate a lot of things. You can bring in NLP, to scan emails, to kind of get a glimpse on what the climate is in the team, etc., and so forth, right? And thinking that based on this, right, now AI can automate a lot of things, spits out basically recommendation and do this and that, right? And I really disagreed with him on this because in theory that might be all useful or looks like interesting, but in practice that's not working because in the moment people would know that there's some machine somewhere in the project management space, either listening or scanning stuff or emails or being part of meetings and capturing things. People will stop disclosing things. They will stop talking. They will just really say the needful, whatever is necessary, but not more than that. And that is exactly what I also tried to say before. That's definitely something that we need to avoid. People actually need to do the opposite. They need to speak up, right, to make some impact. And that we basically not going into the wrong path, right? And that's kind of the balance that we have to find out. How far can we actually go with AI and algorithms that it's actually useful in the project management space, but yet we keep kind of our our basic culture that that we want to share information, we want to share insights, we want to collaborate, etc. So there could be some negative effect if we go too far, just like the one that I just mentioned, where then people will then just start not operating or collaborating, and they will just mute themselves and not really write the email anymore, and maybe not even appear to meetings anymore, right? So these kind of things are kind of the risks which plays a significant role when it comes to culture and also biases in the end.
Absolutely.
If I could add to that, Bev, this is very important, Marcus, what you've said, and Johan touched on it too. But I think if you, because I am very much into sustainability and project management, but also if you look at the core values of sustainability, and if I go back to Johan's story about the women going down to the river, sustainability has 3 dimensions, and that also covers technology, the economic environment, environmental and social dimensions. If you apply the ethics and values of sustainability, those kinds of things won't happen, because the ethics and values of sustainability include dialogue and participation and economic and social justice, okay? Diversity and inclusion, which means you can't just apply AI, for example, in a situation and not have dialogue and participation with stakeholders in that community or that society, and because they need to understand the impact. If you apply, as people were talking about, fear of losing their jobs, and that's at all levels of society, not just project managers, but we're talking about people who drive buses or bricklayers or welders. I mean, these are the things that AI is can be used for, and just totally get rid of the human element in that work. What do we do about that? If you look at it from a sustainability perspective, does that approach actually meet the social benefits and help to improve the well-being of human beings in the society? There's a balance in all of this, okay? And I think we need to consider that when we look at AI. And I think, again, apply many of these sustainability principles when you look at the use of AI. Obviously, you want efficiency, but efficiency at what cost? And what cost to whom?
Sure, Lynn, those are some really, really powerful questions. I want to zone in on one word that's come up both from Marcus, from you, and from what you've been saying, Lynn, and that's collaboration. We had a question coming in that says, sharing successes and failures within an organization is necessary, they agree. But how do you feel about sharing between organizations? Because AI is a bigger conversation than just us, in our team, particularly taking into account privacy, IP issues, all of that kind of thing. Lynn, can I start with you, and then I'll bounce it over to Marcus and then Johan, because I'd like to hear your all inputs on this.
So the question has to do with sharing AI, meaning the product of AI, the information from AI between organizations. Is that
absolutely
what you're referring to?
It's a more collaborative approach kind of thing.
Well, this is quite interesting, because when you get into the context of competition, that becomes a major issue. But the thing is, historically in business, collaboration historically was not the key word in business. But nowadays, there are more and more companies, organizations collaborating, going into joint ventures, co-ventures, et cetera. And it may be, if you have a similar vision, a similar objective, purpose, and in collaborating, you can actually move your organization forward or your company forward, then probably organizations will collaborate. But this whole idea of data and the use of data is a problem, because data costs money, and organizations who collect data, process this data, are not always willing to share it with their competitors, unless they're in a collaborative co-venture type of environment. I don't know what Johan and Marcus think about this, but yeah.
Marcus, over to you.
Yeah, I can add an example here, right? I think it's possible in some organizations actually already sharing data to a certain degree. Of course, you're not just dumping all your data. There's obviously some sensitivity, but to a certain degree, organizations are willing to share data, which actually helps them each other, right? So as an example, I come from a financial services background. And in Germany, there was or is a consortium of a few banks that they use blockchain technology for client onboarding or customer onboarding. Because what was the pain point for many banks, and if not all banks, is when you open an account in a bank, it took forever, right? With all the background checks and all this kind of stuff, collecting information and so forth, right? So, and then there were many people who actually opened several accounts in several banks, right? So they had to go through the same process over and over again, right? And that's not really customer friendly, obviously, right? And people complained, etc. So what they did, they built that consortium, and so one gets onboarded in one bank. That person goes through this whole process. All the information gets captured in the blockchain, and then when that person goes somewhere else to another bank, that's all there. That's being shared, right? So the banks actually share this information with each other that they have actually captured in that process, and that helped them basically to make the whole process way more efficient. And ultimately, it helped them also to reduce cost, because you would not have to collect all that information anymore. It's already there. So it's like a give and take. So there are means to share data. Obviously, it is, as Lynn mentioned, there's some sensitivity and there's some money aspect as well. But there are situations and scenarios where that's fully feasible, actually.
Marcus, can I ask you a follow-up question there? I mean, part of project management, and for the last sort of like 10 or 12 minutes, I'd like to get as practical as we can around the project management space and how project managers themselves can use it. I mean, stakeholder engagement and working with stakeholders is probably one of the biggest things that a project manager has to do. Are we at a place where we can start using this now? You know, the whole blockchain technology, I know blockchain also, you know, enables us to be able to decide what we want to share, when we want to share it. So maybe the direct question is, how can we use this more effectively in our stakeholder engagement?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you're asking about blockchain, for example, right? I mean, I have looked at this myself and wondered how could we leverage this. For now, as far as I was able to get to in construction project management, was dealing with vendors and contracts, etc. I think it makes it's useful, and I think in several construction firms they actually have already that in use. I wouldn't know how to actually implement this properly across all different other industries in the project management space. For example, I come from IT software development. Yeah, because blockchain probably there is not really usable, as at least I would know. But to some degree, like construction, as I mentioned, I think it's there is a use case for this, right? To actually leverage this, and that. When you're saying stakeholder engagement, so that is basically your vendor that you're engaging with and kind of facilitating this whole process and keep them also accountable to things, which probably could be a problem. So this is one thing.
Thank you.
That I can think of.
Thank you, Johan. Johan, what are your thoughts?
I think in a highly competitive world, what companies are willing to share with each other is very limited. And for understandable reasons. But I think Marcus used a good example because it is, if we can all equally benefit from it, we will most likely all contribute to it. You know, so it's a benefit to all banks because one bank did the grunt work of getting all this data, but then I also want to make sure that you're also doing grunt work on data that's going to benefit me as a bank. But an example I want to use is a year or so ago, we launched the Automation Forum here in South Africa. And we've, and it's a lot of it's focused on robotics, process automation, more and more so on intelligent automation now. But we've had people from different banks and telcos and insurance companies, for instance, doing talks, panel discussions, and the baseline or the some of the rules are just, obviously you can't share company confidential information and the like, but people learned so much from each other. The one thing they all learned is that we're all struggling with the same issues. Now, as a consultant and a vendor, I work across different customers, but if you just work for Bank X, that's your world, you know, and you think we're really struggling and all the other banks are doing well. And one of the big things that came out of these sessions of people sharing is that firstly, they got the comfort of everyone struggling with the same stuff in automation, and skill shortage, for instance, is the one thing, you know, getting buy-in from business and the like. But it also encouraged people to, despite all these struggles and thinking they're not doing as well as all the others, to say we're actually not doing that bad. So I think we do have to collaborate, but I think there's going to be limitation when so data sharing, I don't necessarily see happening unless, for instance, a bank is working with a fintech startup or something like that. But from a PM community point of view, I think there can be most likely a lot more collaboration, sharing stories, sharing failures, sharing experiences, learning from each other. You know, what is it that you wish you knew 20 years ago? Why can't we help a youngster coming into this industry with those kind of lessons, for instance?
Thanks, Johan. I think let's the last 5 minutes, and I'd like a nice closing statement for each of you. Let's take it straight. If you were sitting with a project manager in front of you now and talking ethics, all right, what would you say to them as a kind of sort of like closing remark? I want to give you a minute or two, so don't feel like you have to rush here. What would you say to them about taking ethics into the future in project management in the best and most practical way possible? Lynn, can I start with you?
Yeah, thank you. That's a really important question. And I think a lot of it is contextual. There may be some very specific things that apply across the board. But I would say, for one, you need to build a culture within a team, even if you don't have a culture within your organization, that respects the unique human skills of individuals on your team and your collective knowledge and skills. And you need to build a culture that integrates your uniquely human skills with AI. So to ensure that you're enabling your teams to develop those skills and contribute those skills to project decision-making, whether it be concerning how you conceptualize the project, your approach to managing the project, your approach to engaging stakeholders, et cetera. And you want to do that so that you get optimal performance from the team and that they get satisfaction in their work. Because what is the purpose of work? We want to earn a living. We need to support ourselves. We need to feed ourselves and our families, et cetera, and extended families. But we also want satisfaction in our work. And the introduction of artificial intelligence itself, if we don't develop and continue to encourage our team to use those uniquely human skills, the level of satisfaction in the work will definitely go down. And I think the values you need to bring to doing that would be the values of inclusion, dialogue, participation, and equity. I mean, Marcus talked about people not wanting to speak anymore, okay? This is very important because that is what could happen in a team where they feel that artificial intelligence data will surpass anything that they ever could contribute. And then the fear of being wrong. And as I said, also built in that culture is understanding how failing can be a positive skill if it's developed in the right way and seen in the right way on a team. And that's through culture on a team.
Lynn, thank you so much. Johan, I'm going to hand over to you. Final thoughts.
You ask tricky questions, which makes this panel discussion interesting. Look, I think it's about the real value of the human beings around us. And yes, it's a bit different if you think of family than compared to colleagues, for instance. I think we tend to be very transactional in the work environment, and you're just a line item on a pay slip, and if you don't help me do what I need to do, I don't really care much about you. And also, regulation or rules in itself will not breed ethical behavior. And a lot of what you've said, Lynn, you've actually taken the wind out of my sail, so thank you for that. So difficult questions, I'd like to be the first to answer from now on, okay? I'm just joking. No, so because then the others can repeat what I've said. No, so if you look at your team, if you look at your stakeholders, you have to have value for that human being. We have to find out what is it behind that face that makes them tick, that makes them work, what is important to them. You know, I've seen over the years that there are some fairly average people in teams, but by spending time really figuring out what they're dealing with, you know, maybe going through a divorce, maybe not able to eat every morning, or a child on drugs or whatever. And when people open up because they trust you and you get to the basics of what's making that human being tick, you get amazing things out of seemingly average performers. But you can't, I don't know if you can teach people to care for each other. I think some people do and some don't, but we have to try. You know, I love this AI stuff, but I love people and the value of human beings a lot more. And that must drive the ethics more than any rules and regulations, I think.
Johan, you've hit the nail on the head. Marcus, leaving the best for last, would you like to round off our fantastic panel with your thoughts on, you've got a project manager sitting in front of you. What is your best advice for them?
Yeah, my advice would be, or my view would be, we have to be focusing on knowledge mainly, right? Consistently, always, right? That's why I always try to avoid these terms like data-driven or AI-driven, or mapping this to other things like, you know, where we say we're an agile-driven team or whatever, right? We are all based on knowledge, right? We gain knowledge, right? From our own experience, obviously, we learn and then we revise things, right? And we learn some things, something new that we perceive that we actually were wrong about certain things. And we bring data and AI, we bring that basically into this whole context or in this whole mix of knowledge for additional insights, right? And what we make out of this, that needs to be basically a combined approach with all what's in it, right? So the human experience, the intuition, even gut feeling, I think, is a contributor there, right? And the data right now, right? So, and as I said before, there were these approaches like agile, right? And I've seen that, which is obviously nothing right now about AI, but just to conceptualize this or illustrate this, I have been working in organizations where they come in, you know, everybody's doing agile, right? We have to be agile, which is complete nonsense, right? No, there's no one fits all, right? And AI will not fit everything, right? So we have to be open on things, right? So never get that away from you, that you know, you just get locked into something. We have to do agile, we have to do AI, we have to be data driven. We have to be working with our knowledge. Everything contributes, yeah, and that's the most important thing. And we learn, right? And we will discover that on some things we were wrong, and then we revise and learn about this, and then we proceed, right? That's how it usually works. But the risk I see is usually like if when people say, as I said before, like we're data driven or we're AI driven, and it's all this automated, etc. Then that, for me, that alarm bells comes on, because then what Johan mentioned before, then we start this approach where we stop thinking, right? And that would be very dangerous.
It would be. To the panel, you have been absolutely exceptional. Thank you so much. What I'm going to ask everybody to do, please, is to look at that for that little reaction button at the bottom. Shall we show some appreciation to all of our speakers and our panelists? The one thing we have learned today is that the future of work is human, and that technology must serve us, and we need to do it consciously if we do not want to become the servant to technology. Thank you so much for your contribution. Thank you so much to the audience. You've been wonderful. Selo, what you mentioned there about trust is absolutely foundational. Let's take these conversations back into our families, into our communities, into our organizations, and let's just be better humans. Tunde, can I hand over to you? It's been a wonderful summit. I have had an absolutely fantastic time as always. This is probably my favorite conference of the year. Can I hand over to you to say thank you, to wrap it up? And I think you've got one surprise left in your pocket, and I'm going to leave that up to you. To the audience, great. Thank you very much.
All right. Yes, good.
Tunde, that's it for the video. Over to you.
No, thank you, Louis, and thanks to our lovely panelists. And yes, we're bringing our session right to a close now. And of course, as we're wrapping up now, from all that we've gathered this day, we can say, well, the future of AI and projects management is human. There's no doubt about that. And of course, we as humans remain in control. Hence, regulation is important, but remains a challenge. From what Johan Stein just said, that we can't regulate AI enough, and indeed, I agree. So it's been a wonderful experience listening to all the speakers and interesting contributions all day. Just before we finalize the segment of the event, I would like to just bring to this session somebody who has been with us since the beginning and taking notes and doing some kind of background work to give us a sense of what we've captured today. So I'll be introducing to you Agalia. Agalia is a graphic recorder based in Bangalore in India. Our involvement in this summit is going to be shared with us in a moment. So if you can just spotlight, oh, she's there already, wonderful. Wonderful.
Thanks, Tunde.
Right, you certainly, yes, I've been watching your involvement since the beginning of this summit. So, well, over to you now.
Yeah, thanks, Tunde. So I've been a very silent observer, and I've been harvesting throughout whatever the conversation was happening. Almost 80% of the work is almost done, which I'm going to share it with you all. Okay. Yes, that's about the final panel discussion that we had. And this was started by Maurice and his content on how AI will transform the future of business and society, followed by the case study of Plug and Play by Sheila and Harald, who was talking about BIM and the future of the project, talking about smart homes and automated houses, running us through a 3D virtual house. And Johan talking about the smart technology era and the pros and cons around it. I'm still working on Maria's project, which I will share, in a while sooner, the final one. But otherwise, this is what the whole harvest is from the session. And this will be shared with the team, of course, for sure.
Right. All right. Thanks so much, Galia, for all the good work you've been doing. And by the way, for our audience this afternoon, Galia was with us last year. And so we're happy that you could join us again this year. Thank you so much. What we're going to do is, for your participation in this event, Galia is going to make the images we've seen into a sort of ebook. And this will be emailed to all of you. So at least you can keep as a memorabilia for this event. And just as we're wrapping up, I'd just like to make a few announcements so that one is to give a sense of appreciation to our sponsors. But before I do that, as you can see that some people are dropping off already, we would like to just do a screen grab at this stage. So I'll give the access again to Louis, who's going to do the screen grab for us. And in doing that, obviously, we would like you to switch on your videos. For those of you that can, we would encourage that you switch on your videos, and then we can do the screen grab. Louis, over to you.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, if everyone is ready, let's quickly take our screen grab. We're going to go for a screen grab in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. That is for group 1. Smiling. Right, let's quickly go over to the second part, and everybody can smile again for us, please. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Smiling.
Good.
Very, very nice. The fourth page, please. Everybody can smile. Going in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Smiling. There we go. And the final page, everybody can smile in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. That's all. Good. The pages. Thank you so much, Tunde. Back to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Now, just bringing this, as I was saying, we have so much to say about the sponsors that have supported this program right from the time we started. I would like to just give a big thanks to them. The first being Exaro, our gold sponsor, for the support and all they've done throughout this season. We really do appreciate your involvement and your journey with us as the local chapter of PMI. And we also like to give thanks to Nelson Mandela Children's Fund for the same support that they've given us. They're one of our bronze sponsors, and the Graduate School of Technology Management, University of Pretoria. And the last being ProSite Plan. You're all very well appreciated. Now, my position will not be complete without obviously talking about our speakers. We want to really give you best of sense of appreciation for all that you've done and staying with us right through this planning sessions and even coming today. We really appreciate and give you all hearts for the work that you've done for us. Without you, this would not have happened. And the moderator, the Bev Hancock, staying on this call from the beginning right up to this time and navigating this whole process. We appreciate all that you've done. Thank you so much. And it's almost like you are a resident moderator now. So next year, you can be sure we'll be running back to you for another session. And of course, then we have Louis Negrini, and supported by Polly, our technical host for this event. Thanks, Louis, for the great work you've done. And I was hoping you're going to be putting a spotlight on yourself, but I'm not seeing you. I'm not seeing Bev, but of course, we don't have much time now. Now, the team behind this whole program, as you can see, those that have been shown there, can we see the next group of people? Then, of course, as you can see, the people there have done great work right from last year when we started this process. Thank you all for the support and all that you've done. And the last said there, thank you all, guys. You've really made it happen. Really appreciate your experience and the skill and talent that you put into this. Now, just as the last set of my thanks and appreciation to what has happened, one thing we'd like to do is we will be giving away some PMI branded items to you, our distinguished sponsors, and of course, those of you that have been on this journey with us. And one thing we'll be doing is we'll be looking at the first maybe 50 that registered for this event. We'll be sending you some details of getting some branded items to yourselves, which will be delivered to your door, provided you're in the country. So you can expect an email from us in the next few days. And the last part of this is for those that are registered with PMI as members, you obviously would like to know how many PDUs you get for your participation. It's 5 PDUs, and the certificate for that will be issued to you in the next week. So you can expect that to be emailed to you on the email address that you've used to register. And on that note, we're bringing this to a close. We want to thank you all for your attendance, the support, and the discussions that you've had throughout the session. We hope to see you next year when definitely we'll be having it as a hybrid, COVID aligned. Thank you so much, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you, everyone. Cheers.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Yes, everybody.
Thank you.
Hey, bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Cheers, bye.
Cheers, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, 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 bye. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Cheers, everyone. Bye. Bye. We appreciate.
Cheers, everyone. Bye.
Learning a lot from you guys. Wish to get another one very soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Tunde.
Bye-bye, everyone.
We appreciate it. We love you. Bye.
Yabonga. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Cheers, bye.
Bye, bye. The speakers. Wonderful speakers.